I said, get up before I call the cops. Theodore Ashford didn't resist. He simply looked up at the younger man with eyes that had seen more art, more beauty, and more cruelty than most people could imagine. His worn coat hung loose on his thin frame, the fabric threadbare at the elbows. His shoes, once expensive leather, were now cracked and faded. To everyone watching from inside the gleaming glass doors of Whitlock Auction House, he looked exactly like what they assumed he was, a homeless man seeking warmth on a bitter Manhattan evening. Please, Theo said quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind. I have every right to be here. I'm attending the auction. The guard laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the cold air. Yeah, right? And I'm the King of England. Move along, old man, before this gets ugly. Inside the auction house, Lydia Hart pressed her face closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Something about the scene outside made her stomach twist. She'd been working at Whitlock's for 3 years, always in the background, always invisible to the wealthy collectors who swept through the doors. But she recognized something in the old man's posture, a dignity that didn't match his appearance. Should someone help him? She asked, turning to her supervisor. Margaret Chin didn't even look up from her clipboard. Help who? The vagrant? Security will handle it. We have an auction starting in 40 minutes, Lydia. Focus on your job, not the street people. But Lydia couldn't focus. She watched as the guard grabbed the old man's arm again, watched as Theo nearly fell on the icy steps. Something in her chest tightened, a feeling she couldn't ignore. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her coat and pushed through the doors. The cold hit her like a slap, but she barely noticed. Wait, she called out, hurrying down the steps. Wait, please. The guard turned, annoyed. Miss Hart, go back inside. This doesn't concern you. He said he's here for the auction, Lydia said, reaching Theo's side. Up close, she could see the lines on his face, the way his hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the cold. Do you have a catalog, sir? Theo reached into his coat with slow, deliberate movements and pulled out a worn auction catalog. It was the expensive kind, the limited edition that cost $200 and came with detailed provenance for every piece. The pages were dog-eared, marked with notes in elegant handwriting. Lydia felt her heart skip. He has a catalog. He's a registered attendee. That doesn't mean anything, the guard said. He probably found it in the trash. Look at him. I'm looking at him, Lydia said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. And I'm seeing someone who deserves basic respect. Let him in. The guard's radio crackled. What's the holdup out there? Before he could respond, a black limousine pulled up to the curb and everything changed. The driver rushed to open the door, and Gerald Pemberton emerged like a king surveying his domain. His cashmere coat probably cost more than Lydia made in 6 months. Diamond cufflinks caught the streetlights as he adjusted his silk scarf. What's this commotion? Gerald demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. His eyes landed on Theo, and his face twisted with disgust. Good God, is that a homeless person? On the steps of Whitlock's. Sir, we're handling it, the guard said quickly. Handling it? Gerald's voice rose. You're conversing with him like he's a person. Remove him immediately. Do you have any idea who's attending tonight's auction? I'm not walking past some beggar to get to my seat. Lydia stepped between Gerald and Theo. He's an attendee, Mr. Pemberton. He has a catalog and every right to be here. Gerald's eyes finally focused on her, and she felt the weight of his contempt. And who are you? An assistant? A secretary? You're out of line. This man is clearly not one of us. Security, if you don't remove him in the next 30 seconds, I'll be speaking to Montgomery Whitlock about replacing you. Another car pulled up and Cassandra Monroe stepped out, her red dress a splash of color against the gray evening. She took in the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. What's the delay? The auction starts soon, and I have no intention of missing my chance at the Vermeer. Just removing some trash, Gerald said, gesturing dismissively at Theo. Cassandra's laugh was like ice cracking. Well, hurry up. Some of us have actual money to spend tonight. Theo said nothing. He simply stood there, silent and still, watching them with those ancient eyes. But Lydia saw something flicker across his face, just for a moment. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something that looked like recognition. Please, Lydia tried again, looking at the security guard. Just let him attend. What's the harm? The guard looked between Gerald's furious face and Lydia's pleading one. Finally, he sighed. Fine. But he sits in the back row. And if he causes any disruption, he's out. Understood. Theo nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. As he moved toward the door, Gerald deliberately stepped into his path. You don't belong here, old man. Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight. People like you don't get to breathe the same air as people like me. For the first time, Theo spoke directly to Gerald. His voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made even Gerald hesitate. You're right about one thing, Mr. Pemberton. This does end tonight. Gerald blinked, confused by the response, but Theo was already moving past him, climbing the steps with slow but steady determination. Lydia followed, ignoring Margaret's furious gestures from inside. The interior of Whitlock Auction House was everything the outside promised. Opulent, intimidating, designed to remind you of your place in the world. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. The walls displayed rotating pieces from upcoming auctions, each one worth more than most people's houses. The air smelled of expensive perfume and older money. Theo took a seat in the last row, as instructed. He folded his hands in his lap and waited, still as a statue. Around him, the auction house filled with the elite of New York's art world. They arrived in clusters, air-kissing and name-dropping, their jewelry catching the light like small fires. Naomi Zhang entered quietly, her press badge giving her access but not acceptance. She was young, hungry, known for exposing corruption in the art world. Her eyes scanned the room, cataloging faces, looking for the story beneath the surface. When her gaze landed on Theo, sitting alone in the back, she paused. Something about him didn't fit. She'd learned to trust that instinct. Duncan Fairweather arrived last, 15 minutes before the auction began. He was a legend in the art world, a historian who could authenticate a painting with a single glance, who had advised museums and collectors for 4 decades. His reputation was beyond reproach. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he was the smartest person in any room. Montgomery Whitlock greeted him personally. Duncan, wonderful to see you. Are you ready for tonight? As ready as I'll ever be, Duncan said, his British accent still crisp after 30 years in America. The Vermeer is extraordinary. I've verified its provenance 3 times. Whoever wins it tonight is getting a piece of history. Let's hope they're prepared to pay for it, Monty said with a smile. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Monty took the podium, his practiced smile beaming out at the assembled collectors. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what promises to be an extraordinary evening. Before we begin, let me remind you that all sales are final, all payment terms are clearly outlined in your catalogs, and we expect the highest level of decorum throughout the evening. His eyes swept the room and landed, just for a moment, on Theo. A small frown creased his forehead, but he continued. We'll begin with lot number 1, a beautiful Qing dynasty vase, circa 1740. The early lots went quickly. A vase for 300,000. A sculpture for $500,000. Gerald and Cassandra bid aggressively on a Renaissance bronze, driving the price up more out of spite than desire. Gerald won at 800,000, and Cassandra's smile was tight enough to crack. Through it all, Theo sat motionless. But Lydia, standing against the side wall as required for staff, saw his eyes tracking every piece. Saw the way his fingers twitched slightly when a particular painting came up. Saw him lean forward, just an inch, when Duncan provided historical context for a Dutch master. Naomi saw it too. She'd moved to a position where she could watch both the bidders and Theo. Her reporter's instinct was screaming. This man wasn't what he appeared to be. Lot 47, Monty announced, and the energy in the room changed. Our crown jewel this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a recently authenticated work by Johannes Vermeer, titled Woman Reading by Candlelight. Oil on canvas, dated approximately 1665. This piece has been in a private collection for over a century, and this is the first time it's been available for public sale. Two assistants carefully wheeled out the painting. Even from the back row, Theo could see it clearly. The woman in the painting seemed to glow from within, her face illuminated by candlelight that Vermeer had captured with impossible skill. It was smaller than his more famous works, more intimate. A treasure that belonged in a museum, not hidden in someone's private collection. The room seemed to hold its breath. Bidding will open at $15 million, Monty said. Immediately, paddles shot up around the room. 15 million became 20, then 25. Gerald and Cassandra were in it from the start, their rivalry
93.
overriding financial
93
sense.
is bid. 95.
Other bidders dropped out
100.
as the price climbed past 30 million. 35 million, Monty called out, his voice rising with excitement. Do I hear 36? Cassandra's paddle rose. Her face was flushed, her breathing quick. She needed this. Her gallery's reputation depended on high-profile acquisitions. 36 million. 37, Gerald countered immediately, not even waiting for Monty to call for it. 38 million, Cassandra said, her voice tight. Gerald hesitated. His paddle started to rise, then lowered. 38 million was at the top of his budget. He'd be leveraged for years. But the thought of losing to Cassandra Munro burned. Going once, Monty said, scanning the room. Going twice. A paddle rose from the back row. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Theodore Ashford sat there, his worn coat still buttoned, his paddle raised with steady certainty. $40 million, Monty said slowly, his voice uncertain. We have 40 million from the gentleman in the back. Sir, I need to verify. Are you kidding me? Gerald exploded, surging to his feet. This is a joke. That's the vagrant from outside. Security, remove him now. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Cassandra stood as well, her face a mixture of shock and fury. This is outrageous, Montgomery. How did he even get in here? Monty held up his hands, trying to restore order. Please, everyone, let me handle this. Sir, he addressed Theo directly, I'm going to need you to provide proof of funds before we can accept your bid. Theo stood slowly. Despite his shabby appearance, despite being the center of hostile attention, he moved with a grace that made several people in the audience pause. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather envelope, weathered but expensive. From it, he extracted a single sheet of paper. This is a verified letter of credit from Zurich International Bank, Theo said, his voice carrying clearly now, stronger than before. It guarantees payment of up to 100 million US dollars for the purposes of art acquisition. The verification codes are listed at the bottom. You may call the bank directly if you wish. He walked down the aisle, and people shrank back as if he carried a disease. When he reached the podium, he handed the document to Monty. Under the bright lights, his face was clearly visible for the first time. Weathered, yes. Old, certainly. But there was something in those eyes, something that spoke of wealth and culture and a lifetime spent among beauty. Monty's hands shook as he examined the document. His face went pale. This appears to be legitimate. Duncan, could you verify the codes? Duncan Fairweather came forward, already pulling out his phone. He entered the verification sequence, waited, then froze. His phone nearly slipped from his fingers. My God, he whispered. What? Gerald demanded. What is it? Duncan looked up at Theo, and his face had transformed from confusion to something like awe or terror. This letter of credit is real. It's issued under the name Theodore J. Ashford. He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The Theodore Ashford. The name meant nothing to most people in the room. But for those who knew, truly knew the secret levels of the art world, it was like a bomb going off. I don't understand, Cassandra said, but her voice had lost its edge. Duncan turned to face the room, and he looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. Theodore Ashford is one of the most significant private collectors in the world. He hasn't been photographed in over 30 years. No one knows where he lives. But his collection is legendary. Museums have been trying to acquire pieces from him for decades. He owns works by Rembrandt, Caravaggio, Turner, Monet. His Rothko collection alone is worth over $200 million. The silence was absolute. He's known in certain circles as the ghost collector, Duncan continued, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his subject. In the 1960s, he was a promising young artist. Critics compared him to Lucian Freud. But then he sold everything, disappeared from public view, and started collecting. He's probably consulted on half the major acquisitions in the last 40 years under various pseudonyms. And he's standing right here. Gerald's face had gone from red to white. Cassandra looked like she might be sick. Around the room, people pulled out their phones, frantically searching for information. Theo stood at the front of the room, waiting patiently. Finally, he spoke. My bid stands at $40 million. Does anyone wish to counter? Cassandra's paddle trembled in her hand. She looked at the Vermeer, then at Theo, then at the paddle. Finally, it rose. $42 million. Her voice cracked on the numbers. $50 million, Theo said calmly, not even waiting for Monty to process the previous bid. The amount was staggering. More than the estimated value. More than the painting should be worth. But Theo said it like he was ordering coffee. $50 million, Monty repeated, his voice shaking. Do I hear 51? Silence. Cassandra's paddle stayed down. Gerald stared at the floor. Going once, going twice, sold. To Mr. Theodore Ashford for $50 million. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to split the room in two. Theo nodded once. I'll arrange for payment tomorrow morning. The painting can remain in your custody until the funds clear. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have something to say. He turned to face the assembled crowd. In his shabby coat, surrounded by people in designer clothing, he should have looked out of place. But somehow, in that moment, everyone else looked false. Like they were the ones wearing costumes. I came here tonight dressed as you see me, Theo said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. It was a test. A test of character. I've been thinking about opening my collection to the public, perhaps working with an auction house to eventually donate pieces to museums. I wanted to see what kind of people I'd be working with. He paused, letting that sink in. Gerald Pemberton looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. One person passed that test, Theo continued, his eyes finding Lydia against the wall. Miss Hart, would you join me, please? Lydia's legs felt like water as she walked forward. Every eye in the room was on her. Margaret looked furious. Monty looked confused. But Theo's face was kind. This young woman, Theo said, was the only person who treated me with basic human dignity tonight. She didn't care what I looked like or what I could offer her. She simply saw another person in need of help. That's become rare in this world. He turned to Gerald. You called me trash. You demanded I be removed. You said people like me don't get to breathe the same air as people like you. You're right about that last part, but not in the way you think. I don't want to breathe the same air as you, Mr. Pemberton. Your money is new, your taste is questionable, and your character is bankrupt. I've consulted for the Pemberton Foundation 3 times over the years under assumed names. I recommended against purchasing 4 different pieces you insisted on buying. All 4 were later exposed as forgeries. You didn't listen then. I doubt you'll listen now. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it. No words came. Cassandra tried to step forward, her professional smile sliding back into place. Mr. Ashford, I apologize for any misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss. No, Theo said simply. You laughed at me. You called me trash. You made your character clear. I have no interest in working with you, now or ever. He turned to Monty. Mr. Whitlock, I had considered consigning several pieces through your auction house. Works that would have brought unprecedented attention and revenue. But after tonight, I've reconsidered. The culture here reflects its leadership, and what I've seen tonight is not what I want associated with my legacy. Monty's face crumpled. He understood exactly what he'd lost. Billions in potential commissions gone. His reputation damaged beyond repair. The one bright spot, Theo continued, turning back to Lydia, is you, Miss Hart. I'd like to offer you a position. My collection needs a curator, someone to help me prepare it for eventual public viewing. Someone with integrity. Someone who sees art for what it is, beauty that belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford it. Would you be interested? Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. Yes. Yes, of course. Good, Theo said. He looked around the room one final time. I hope some of you will think about tonight. About how you treat people. About what wealth really means. About the difference between owning beauty and appreciating it. He started toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and Duncan? Thank you for the authentication work on the Vermeer. It's exquisite. But I should mention that you missed something. There's a secondary signature hidden in the candlelight. It's a Vermeer, certainly, but it's also partially the work of his daughter, Maria. That makes it even more valuable, historically speaking. You might want to update your provenance notes. Duncan's face went through several colors before settling on a deep crimson. He'd spent months on that authentication and missed a crucial detail. Theo walked out of Whitlock Auction House with Lydia beside him. Behind them, the room erupted in chaos. People shouting, phones ringing, Cassandra and Gerald screaming at Monty, reporters rushing to get the story. Outside, the cold air felt clean. A black car pulled up, understated but clearly expensive. A driver emerged and opened the door. Can I offer you a ride home, Miss Hart? Theo asked. I should probably. Lydia looked back at the auction house, at the job she'd just abandoned. You'll be paid through the end of the month, Theo said gently. And I'll match whatever Whitlock was paying you with a significant increase. You can start whenever you're ready. There's no rush. Lydia got in the car. As they pulled away, she could see faces pressed against the windows of Whitlock's, watching them leave. Can I ask you something? She said after a few blocks. Of course. Why did you really come tonight dressed like that? Was it just a test? Theo was quiet for a moment. Partially. But also, I wanted to remember what it feels like. To be dismissed. To be treated as less than human. When you have wealth for as long as I have, you forget. People treat you differently. They smile even when they hate you. They agree even when you're wrong. Tonight reminded me that most people's kindness is conditional. Except yours. I just did what anyone should do. Exactly, Theo said. But you were the only one who did it. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. And drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Lydia's situation. Your engagement really helps the channel grow. The car wound through Manhattan streets, eventually heading uptown, then further north than Lydia had ever been in a private car. They crossed into an area of estates and old money, where properties were measured in acres, not lots. The car turned onto a private road, passed through a gate that opened automatically, and followed a winding drive through manicured grounds. Finally, they stopped in front of a house that took Lydia's breath away. It was old, built in the style of a French chateau, with lights glowing warm in dozens of windows. Welcome, Theo said, to the collection. Inside was everything Lydia had dreamed of and never dared hope she'd see. The entrance hall alone contained a Monet, a Degas, and what looked like an early Picasso. But Theo didn't stop to let her gawk. He led her through room after room, each one a carefully curated gallery. I've been collecting for 53 years, Theo said as they walked. I started with nothing but a good eye and some luck. Bought a painting at a yard sale for $20 that turned out to be a lost Winslow Homer. Sold it for $3 million and never looked back. Why did you disappear? Lydia asked. Duncan said you were a promising artist. Theo stopped in front of a painting Lydia didn't recognize. It showed a young man, barely more than a boy, staring at his own reflection with haunted eyes. The technique was masterful, the emotion raw. That's one of mine, Theo said quietly. I painted it when I was 24. A critic called it derivative and emotionally manipulative. He wasn't entirely wrong. I realized I was a better curator than creator. Better at recognizing genius than achieving it myself. So I stopped painting and started collecting. I've never regretted it. They continued through the house. Lydia saw works she'd only read about in textbooks. A complete series of Turner seascapes. 3 Rothkos that made her want to weep with their emotional intensity. A Caravaggio that museums had been searching for since World War II. I'm leaving it all to museums, Theo said. Different pieces to different institutions based on their collections and their commitment to public access. But I need help organizing it. Documenting provenance. Deciding who gets what. Making sure everything goes to the right place. Are you really interested in this position, Miss Hart, or were you just being polite? Lydia turned to face him, her eyes shining. Mr. Ashford, this is my dream job. I studied art history at Columbia. I spent 6 years working my way up at Whitlock's, hoping for a chance to do real work with real art. This is everything I've ever wanted. Theo smiled, and suddenly he looked younger. Then it's yours. We'll start Monday. For tonight, let me show you just a few more pieces. There's a Vermeer upstairs that makes the one we saw tonight look like a postcard. And I have something I think you'll appreciate even more. He led her to a small room at the back of the house. It was different from the others, less formal. The paintings on these walls were smaller, more personal. These are works by unknown artists. People who never achieved fame, whose names are lost to history. But their work has merit. Beauty. Truth. I buy them when I can, save them from estate sales and garbage dumps. They deserve to be seen too. Lydia moved slowly around the room, examining each piece. A portrait of a woman laughing. A landscape of a farm at sunset. A still life of books and a candle. None of them would ever hang in a major museum. But each one was honest, crafted with care, created by someone who loved their art. This is the heart of the collection, Theo said. The famous pieces upstairs, those will go to museums. But these stay with the estate. They're my personal gallery, my reminder that art isn't about value or prestige. It's about one person trying to capture something true and share it with the world. The moment we forget that, we become like Gerald Pemberton, collecting status instead of beauty. They stood together in the small room, surrounded by forgotten art. Outside, night had fully fallen. Somewhere in Manhattan, the art world was reeling from the events at Whitlock's. Cassandra Munro was probably calling in favors, trying to salvage her reputation. Gerald Pemberton was likely rage-drinking expensive scotch. Montgomery Whitlock was calculating his losses. But here, in this quiet room, none of that mattered. There was only the art, the beauty, and the connection between two people who understood what really counted. There's one more thing, Theo said. He pulled a worn photograph from his wallet. It showed a young black woman in paint-stained overalls, smiling at the camera. My wife, Marianne. She died 12 years ago. Cancer. She was an artist, far better than I ever was. She taught me everything about really seeing art, about looking past the price tag and the prestige, and finding the soul underneath. Everything I've built, it's because of her. Lydia looked at the photograph, at the love in those captured eyes. She would be proud of what you're doing. I hope so, Theo said. She always said our collection should belong to everyone eventually. She said beauty isn't meant to be hoarded. Tonight, watching you stand up for a stranger, I thought, this is someone Marianne would have liked. Someone who gets it. They talked until late, about art and life and the strange paths that led people to their destinations. Theo's driver took Lydia home around midnight, with promises to return Monday morning to begin her new position. Over the next 6 months, Lydia's life transformed. She worked with Theo every day, cataloging the collection, researching provenance, deciding which pieces would go where. She met with museum curators, negotiated donations, arranged for conservation work. It was exhausting, challenging, and absolutely perfect. The art world hadn't forgotten what happened at Whitlock's. The story had gone viral, been featured in the New York Times Art Forum, even made it to morning talk shows. Theodore Ashford became a folk hero overnight, the mysterious collector who exposed the art world's cruelty while championing kindness. Whitlock Auction House survived, barely. Monty had to sell his stake to a larger firm. The new management instituted policies about inclusivity and respect, using Theo's test as a training example. Cassandra Munro's gallery closed 6 months after the auction. Turns out several of her major clients had been considering working with Theo, and his public rejection of her killed those deals. She moved to Los Angeles, started over, and reportedly learned some humility along the way. Gerald Pemberton remained wealthy and obnoxious, but his reputation never recovered. At art events, people whispered behind his back. Several clubs quietly declined to renew his membership. Money couldn't buy back the respect he'd lost. Duncan Fairweather remained friends with Theo. He'd apologized profusely for not recognizing him, but Theo bore no grudge. "You were just doing your job," he'd said. "Besides, you got the important part right. The Vermeer is real, and it's beautiful. That's what matters." Naomi Zhang wrote a feature about Theo that won her a journalism award. She handled the story with sensitivity and depth, focusing not on gossip, but on Theo's philosophy of art and accessibility. Theo granted her an exclusive interview, his first in 3 decades. And Lydia? Lydia thrived. She discovered she had a gift for this work, for understanding not just art, but the stories behind it. She helped Theo finalize his donation plans, ensuring that his collection would be spread across a dozen museums, each piece going to where it would be most appreciated and most accessible to the public. One morning, exactly 6 months after that night at Whitlock's, Theo called Lydia into his study. "I have something to show you," he said. He led her to a door she'd never been through, down a flight of stairs to a climate-controlled room beneath the house. Inside were dozens of crates, carefully labeled and sealed. "Marianne's paintings," Theo said quietly. She never wanted them sold or displayed during her lifetime. Said they were too personal. "But I think it's time. I want to create a foundation in her name. Use these pieces to fund scholarships for young artists from underrepresented communities. People who have talent but not opportunity. And I want you to run it." Lydia felt her eyes fill with tears. "Theo, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Theo said with a smile. "Say you'll help me honor her memory by giving other artists the chances she never had. Say you'll continue this work after I'm gone, because let's be honest, I'm not getting any younger." "Yes," Lydia said. "Of course, yes." They spent the day going through Marianne's paintings. Each one was extraordinary, filled with life and color and emotion. Landscapes that seemed to breathe. Portraits that captured not just faces but souls. Abstract works that made Lydia feel things she couldn't name. She could have been famous, Theo said, holding up a canvas that showed a street scene in Harlem, kids playing in the spray of a fire hydrant, joy captured in brushstrokes. But she didn't care about fame. She painted because she had to, because she loved it. That's the purest form of art. As the sun set, they stood together in that underground room, surrounded by beauty that the world had never seen. Outside, the art world continued its endless dance of money and prestige. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. "Thank you," Lydia said. "For everything. For the job, for trusting me, for teaching me what art really means." Theo shook his head. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. That some people still see other people instead of just opportunities or obstacles. You saved more than my dignity that night, Lydia. You saved my faith in humanity. That's worth more than any painting I own." 3 years later, the Marian Ashford Foundation opened its doors. Its mission: to provide resources, education, and opportunities to young artists who might otherwise never get a chance. The foundation was funded by the sale of carefully selected pieces from Marianne's collection, with the rest donated to museums specializing in African American art and women's art. Theodore Ashford lived to see the foundation's second graduation ceremony, where 10 young artists received full scholarships to prestigious art schools. He sat in the back row, wearing a nice suit this time, but still eschewing attention. He watched the graduates present their work, saw the hope in their eyes, and smiled. He died peacefully 6 months later, surrounded by beauty, with Lydia holding his hand. His last words were, "She would have loved this. Everything we built. Make sure it continues. Make sure the art reaches everyone." The art world mourned him as a titan, a visionary, a rebel. Major museums held memorial exhibitions. Art critics wrote essays about his influence on collecting practices. But those who really knew him, who understood what he cared about, knew he wouldn't have wanted the fuss. Lydia stood at his memorial service, held in the house that had become her second home. Hundreds of people attended: museum directors, artists, students from the foundation, and a handful of people who'd been touched by Theo's quiet generosity over the years. Even Duncan Fairweather came, tears streaming down his face as he delivered a eulogy about friendship and redemption. But the moment that mattered most to Lydia came after everyone had left. She stood alone in the small gallery, the one with the unknown artists, the forgotten beauty. And there, in a place of honor, hung a new edition, the painting Theo had created as a young man, the self-portrait he'd called derivative and emotionally manipulative. But Lydia saw something else in it now. She saw honesty. She saw a young man questioning himself, doubting himself, but still trying. Still creating. Still believing that beauty mattered, even if he wasn't sure he could achieve it. A note was pinned beside the frame, in Theo's careful handwriting, for Lydia. Never stop seeing the beauty in unlikely places. Never stop standing up for those who need it. Never stop believing that kindness matters more than money. You are my masterpiece. T.A. Before we wrap up this story, I want to ask you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button if this story moved you. Second, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And third, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. We all need reminders about what really matters in life. Drop a comment below with your thoughts and stay tuned for more stories that will make you think and feel. Lydia carefully removed the note, held it to her chest, and cried. Not from sadness, though she missed him terribly. She cried because she understood now, fully and completely, what Theo had been trying to teach her all along. Art wasn't about the money or the prestige or the recognition. It was about connection. About one human soul reaching out to another across time and space and circumstance, saying, I see you. I understand you. You are not alone. She thought about that cold night outside Whitlock's, when she'd made a choice without thinking, when she'd simply seen another person who needed help. That moment had changed everything. Not just for her, but for hundreds of artists who would benefit from the foundation. For the museums that would receive Theo's collection. For everyone who would stand in front of those paintings and feel something shift inside them. One small act of kindness, rippling outward like waves on a pond, touching lives she would never know about. The foundation continued to grow. Within 5 years, it had funded over 100 scholarships. Within 10, it had opened satellite programs in 5 cities. The Marian and Theodore Ashford Foundation became synonymous with giving opportunities to those who deserved them but couldn't afford them. And every year, on the anniversary of that auction, Lydia would visit Theo's grave. She'd bring flowers and sit beside the simple headstone that read, Theodore J. Ashford. Collector. Husband. Friend. He saw beauty everywhere. She'd tell him about the new artists they'd helped, about the paintings that had found homes in museums, about the ways his legacy continued to spread. And she'd thank him again and again for teaching her that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely from one heart to another. Years passed. Lydia became a recognized expert in art curation and philanthropy. She gave lectures at universities, advised museums, and continued to run the foundation with the same principles Theo had taught her. She never forgot where she came from, never lost sight of what mattered. Sometimes, late at night in the house that now belonged to the foundation, she'd walk through the galleries alone. She'd stand in front of the Vermeer that Theo had bought that night, the one that started everything. And she'd remember the old man in the shabby coat, sitting in the back row, watching everything with those ancient, knowing eyes. He'd been testing them all, yes. But more than that, he'd been hoping. Hoping that someone, anyone, would prove that kindness still existed. That humanity still mattered. That in a world obsessed with wealth and status, there were still people who saw other people. She'd proven him right. And in doing so, she'd changed her own life forever. The Vermeer hung in a place of honor, but not in a museum. Theo had specified in his will that this one painting should stay with the foundation, a reminder of the night everything changed. Beneath it, a small plaque told the story. Not the full story, but enough. Enough to make people think. Enough to make them question their own assumptions and prejudices. Purchased at auction by Theodore J. Ashford, the plaque read, "Who came dressed as a beggar to test our character. Most of us failed. One person passed." This painting stands as a reminder. Never judge a person by their appearance. Never let wealth determine worth. Never forget that kindness is the most valuable thing we possess. Students from the foundation would stand in front of that painting reading those words, understanding what they meant. They'd learn about Theo and Marianne, about Lydia and that cold night outside Whitlock's. They'd learn that talent matters, yes, but character matters more. And somewhere, Lydia liked to think Theo and Marianne were watching. Watching the foundation flourish. Watching young artists get chances they never would have had. Watching beauty spread through the world like light through a prism, touching everything it reached. She'd kept her promise. The art reached everyone. The foundation continued. And every day, in ways large and small, Theo's lesson lived on. Treat people with dignity, see beauty in unexpected places, and never underestimate the power of one kind act. Because that's what changed everything. Not $50 million. Not a legendary art collection. Not fame or recognition or prestige. Just one person seeing another person and choosing kindness. That was the real masterpiece. That was what lasted. That was what mattered. And on cold winter nights, when new assistants at galleries and auction houses across the city saw someone who didn't quite fit, who looked like they didn't belong, some of them remembered the story. Some of them paused before judging. Some of them offered coffee and a kind word instead of contempt and rejection. The story spread, as stories do. It became legend, then myth, then lesson. Parents told it to their children. Teachers shared it with students. And every time someone chose kindness over cruelty, compassion over contempt, they honored Theo's memory more than any museum exhibition ever could. Lydia Hart, who had once been invisible in the background, who had spent years being overlooked and underestimated, now stood at the head of one of the most respected foundations in the art world. But she never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed. She never forgot the fear and uncertainty of that life. And she made sure that everyone who came through the foundation's doors, whether they were students or donors or visitors, was treated with the same dignity and respect that she'd shown Theo that night. Because in the end, that's what he'd been teaching her all along. Not how to curate art. Not how to run a foundation. Not how to navigate the complicated world of museums and collectors. He'd been teaching her how to be human. How to see people. How to recognize that every person, regardless of their appearance or circumstances, deserves basic kindness and respect. It was the simplest lesson. And the most profound. As the years went by and Lydia's hair turned gray, she never tired of telling the story. Never grew bored of that cold night, those crucial moments, that choice that changed everything. Because every time she told it, she saw something shift in her listeners' eyes. Understanding. Recognition. Perhaps a memory of their own moments when they'd chosen kindness or cruelty and the consequences that followed. The world didn't change overnight. Cruelty and prejudice didn't disappear. But every person who heard the story and really understood it, every person who chose differently because of it, was a small victory. A small light in the darkness. And enough small lights, Theo had once told her, could illuminate the world. So if this story has touched you today, if it's made you think about how you treat others, about the assumptions you make, about the power of simple kindness, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and most importantly, share this story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who might be standing at their own crossroads, deciding between kindness and cruelty. Your engagement helps us reach more people with stories that matter. Drop a comment below telling us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, or a time you chose to help someone others had dismissed. Let's build a community of people who understand what really matters in life. The Beggar Who Bought a Masterpiece wasn't really about the painting at all. It was about recognizing the masterpiece in every human being. The dignity, the worth, the inherent value that exists in all of us, regardless of how we're dressed or where we come from or what we can offer. That night at Whitlock Auction House, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of art, the most valuable thing in the room wasn't hanging on the walls. It was the choice Lydia Hart made when she walked down those steps and stood up for a stranger. That was the real masterpiece. And it changed everything. So if this story has touched you today, if it's made you think about how you treat others, about the assumptions you make, about the power of simple kindness, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and most importantly, share this story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who might be standing at their own crossroads, deciding between kindness and cruelty. Your engagement helps us reach more people with stories that matter. Drop a comment below telling us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, or a time you chose to help someone others had dismissed. Let's build a community of people who understand what really matters in life.